sleep at some point is impacted for the person with dementia, where they get their days reversed, day and night.
Well, he would actually sleep during the day, and then at night he would be up prowling around like a lion.
Sleep problems are very common as people get older.
The sleep kit is like a really simple idea, and I wanted it to be simple. It's just kind of bringing it back to that idea of human connection.
Welcome back to the Community of Innovation podcast, brought to you by the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, otherwise known as CABHI. I'm Allison Schooler, Managing Director for CABHI and Vice President Research at Baycrest.
And I'm Roseanne Alliong, Director of Research, Innovation, and Translation at Baycrest. Today, we're back with part 4 of our COVID podcast miniseries in collaboration with Baycrest at Home.
Today's episode is going to focus on caregiving for people living with dementia, and in particular, the challenges associated with sleep. So this is a really exciting topic for me because I think, as you know, Roseanne, I'm one of the world's worst sleepers. I actually have created an entire stand-up comedy routine on my lack of sleep, and I'm waiting for Netflix to give me a call for an hour-long special on that.
Well, I think one of our guests today, Dr. Andrew Lim, was perfect for you. He really shared with us the importance of sleep. And I mean, he starts off by telling us that evolutionarily, sleep doesn't seem to make sense for us as a species because, getting hunted and eaten by animals. But then he actually really makes a solid case why you should invest in your sleep quality.
So I'm not more evolved than everyone else, is what you're saying?
No,
that's too bad.
But I think the core of today's episode is really focused on caregivers. And I think, during the pandemic, even more so, the importance of caregivers getting adequate sleep. So, Allison, what was your takeaway?
I think one of the things that really struck me is when Dr. Corrine Ong was talking about how she takes care of her husband who's living with frontotemporal dementia, is the interplay between the sleep issues for the caregiver and the caregivee. And that really hit home for me. And also the fact that it's such a personal journey that what the issues are for one person are going to be completely different from the issues for someone else. What was important to you in this conversation?
I know that we talked to one of the CABHI innovators. I don't know, Allison, if you want to talk about Eve, because she was great.
She's just great. And so Eve is, as you'll hear, the creator of what's called the Sleep Kit, which is this really wonderful set of supports to help people actually working in a caregiver partner perspective to be interacting together to improve sleep. And it's just wonderful. It has all these different elements. I won't spoil the surprise of what's in it. I'll let you listen to that section yourselves.
So this episode is for all those night owls out there, and most especially the caregivers who are caring for those night owls. And so we want to start the pod by introducing our co-executive producer and the director of Baycrest at Home, Simon Cheeseman.
Baycrest at Home is a service for family caregivers of people living in the community who are experiencing cognitive decline, memory issues, or perhaps have a formal diagnosis of dementia. And they're beginning to experience struggles remaining in the place they call home. And it provides services and expertise that you would normally only find on a campus like Baycrest that brings a lot of geriatric specialists together in one place. And we use technology to put that in the hands of people living in the community and helping their loved ones to stay safe and comfortable while looking after their own well-being and making sure that they stay safe and capable of doing that job. And part of what we provide to family caregivers is information and resources that will help them continue to do that role effectively. And this podcast is part of that. It lets people know they're not alone out there. It brings the experience of others to them that they can take advantage of. And we're very excited to continue that with today's episode.
Thanks, Simon. As we kick off the pod, we want to welcome our guests. First, we've got Dr. Corrine Ong, who's an associate professor in the Faculty of Community Services at Ryerson University and is the primary caregiver of her husband who has frontotemporal dementia. And she also held a faculty appointment at the University of British Columbia in the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine. Corrine, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Next, we've got Dr. Adriana Shnall, who is the program director for Baycrest Home in the Clinical Programs Division. And as part of her portfolio, she also leads the Koshitsky Center for Innovations in Family Caregiving. She has 30 years of clinical experience working with older adults and their families, including outpatient community services, long-term care, and inpatient services, much of that time working right here at Baycrest, which is terrific. The lead and a participant in many, many CABHI projects over the years. So welcome, Adriana.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Our third guest is Dr. Andrew Lim. He's a sleep neurologist at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center and an associate professor of neurology at the University of Toronto. And also, Andrew, a CABHI-funded investigator as well. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So let's start our discussion a little bit about asking, why is sleep so biologically important? Maybe, Andrew, if you want to kick us off, why is it so important? I know how passionate I feel about sleep, but why should everybody care about sleep?
Sure. So I mean, that's actually a really good question. It's not as simple an answer as one might think. So, I mean, on the surface of it, it seems as though sleep, from an evolutionary perspective, would be actually a really bad idea, right? I mean, it's a time when you're unconscious, you're immobile, you're vulnerable to being eaten by predators and things like that. And yet, despite that, almost every animal, from worms to fruit flies to dogs to humans, sleep, right? So we know it must be doing something important. But in my own field, which is neurology, we have a maxim about sleep, which is that sleep is generated by the brain and for the brain. That is, the brain is responsible for generating sleep. The brain is what causes us to fall asleep, and it does so to maintain brain health.
That's really good news for most people. It's really bad news for me because I am a horrible, horrible sleeper. And I feel like as I've gotten older, it's just getting worse. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how sleep might change across the lifespan, in particular, how it's impacted in people living with dementia and maybe even the link with dementia, because people have heard maybe that a lack of sleep could actually be a risk factor for increased likelihood of ending up with one sort of dementia or another.
So we know that sleep problems are very common as people get older. It's very common to have more difficulty falling asleep, more difficulty staying asleep, and to have difficulties with daytime sleepiness as well. So we all have a grandparent or another who naps, more than they used to during the day. Now, some of this is because of accumulating medical problems. Obviously, as we get older, we accumulate medical problems that can cause symptoms like pain that make it more difficult to sleep. Some of it is accumulating difficulties with mood or anxiety as well, especially now in COVID, in the COVID era. But some of it appears to be due to the aging process itself, in that some of the areas of the brain that regulate sleep kind of wear out with age, just like other parts of the body. And this appears to be even more so in individuals who have neurodegenerative conditions, who have various forms of dementia. Now, the relationship between sleep and dementia, as far as we can tell, appears to be a two-way street. So what is, without a doubt, is that people with Alzheimer's disease, with Parkinson's disease, with frontotemporal dementia, sleep more poorly than folks without these conditions. What we think is that on the one hand, these conditions appear to cause damage to areas of the brain that regulate sleep, so they make it harder to get good sleep. On the other hand, there's increasing evidence that getting poor sleep may make it more likely for brain damage leading up to Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or vascular dementia. It makes it more likely for this to occur.
So we're definitely going to talk about strategies further into the pod. But before we go there, I just wanted to turn to Corrine as a caregiver. We've kind of talked about Andrew's talked about how sleep impacts persons living with dementia. But I can only imagine that these changes in sleep patterns would also impact their caregivers. So has what Andrew described been part of your caregiving experience?
Oh, definitely. My husband's sleep patterns really changed. In fact, when he was first diagnosed, he was having this sundowning problem, which I wasn't aware of at first. And then I obviously did a lot of research into how dementia affects sleep patterns. And so he would actually sleep during the day. And then at night, he would be up prowling around like a lion. And, it was very, very hard for me because he had actually, I think one of the first symptoms was wandering off. So he did wander off during the days, but I always felt very, very anxious and very concerned that he would wander off at night as well. That was hard for me because then I wasn't able to sleep soundly at night. He also decided for some weird reason. I mean, dementia affects a lot of the behaviors. And I think with frontotemporal as well, it's very behavioral. So he would actually sleep down stairs in the living room while watching TV, and then wake up at night, and then my worry was it's so close to the front door that he would just leave the house. And the first time he did that, he vanished for 6 hours.
I mean, you mentioned that, your husband is experiencing, the sleep challenges that Andrew described, but what about your sleep? Like, how are you doing?
Well, what happened was after the wandering, I knew now that it would probably happen again. And it did. A whole year later, almost the very same day, the first sunny day of spring, or warm day of spring, he wandered off again. So by that time, I was ready for it. Not only did I get him one of those bracelets, the Medic Alert bracelets, I actually put a GPS tracking device on him so that if he wandered off, we could actually find him. Right. Now, the challenge with this second thing was that he actually hopped on the bus. So it was really difficult to find him. But we did, simply because he had the GPS device on him. But that really helped me to sleep. Because what happened was after almost like 6 months of not sleeping properly, not knowing what to do, and then finally finding this GPS tracking device, it's psychological, I guess, because to be honest, nothing would have stopped him from either ripping it off or losing it, or, I just slept so much better and more soundly than I was before. I mean, I actually ended up sleeping on the couch next to him for 6 months because I didn't know what else to do, right? And I actually put Scotch tape all around the door, which, we were told not to do anyways, because in case of emergencies and fire, you're not supposed to tape your front door shut. But I had to do all those really quite silly things. But to me, it was just psychologically comforting and allowed me to sleep a little. But the GPS tracking device did the trick.
Well, it's good having that sort of sense you're getting some control back, which is obviously helping at least with your sleep. So that's a good thing. Adriana, I'm wondering, Corrine's been talking about these issues with frontotemporal dementia, but I'm wondering, is it the same for folks with other forms of dementia, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias? And are the sorts of issues in your practice that you've seen with the challenges that caregivers face in terms of sleep be similar to Corrine's challenges, or are there a whole variety of different kinds of challenges in different kinds of situations?
What's common for most family caregivers of all people, all kinds of causes of dementia, is that sleep at some point is impacted for the person with dementia, where they get their days reversed, day and night, where they, at night, the person living with dementia, they may not be tired because they've been, like you said, sleeping on the couch, dozing on and off, watching TV. Somebody who's younger with dementia may also need to be more physically active and basically is not tired at night. Plus the changes that Andrew was talking that just happen to the brain with dementia. So there's those issues. There's what you beautifully described around the anxiety that for family caregivers experience around the possibility of people leaving, of people getting into trouble. I mean, some people, all kinds of people do different things. So for you, your worry was that he would exit and he would leave and you wouldn't be able to find him. And luckily when it happened, it was during the day. But had those things happen at night, it may have looked very different, right? And so there's the double issue around issues for the person with dementia, issues for the family from your perspective, and the anxiety. And so you were describing that you had anxiety around possible if your husband left or he'd be gone, but there's the anxiety of also what if he falls in the bathroom, or what if if he was somebody who tended to overeat with FTD, somebody who decided to go in the kitchen to just eat himself or eat things that he couldn't eat or he shouldn't have been eating. That the anxieties kind of escalate. There's no end to the worry of what potentially things could be or look like. So there's that. And now with COVID, the anxiety that we're all experiencing with COVID on top of it. And if you were, your fortunate that you are employed, finances are not a concern, but a lot of family caregivers experience financial loss because they either have to stop working to look after their partner or their family member. The person with dementia may have to stop working because of the dementia and they were still working, and there's huge financial implications. So imagine if on top of it, you had the headache of how do I pay rent? And you're at night stewing, and now you have COVID, you have financial issues, you have your husband potential wandering at night. All these things add up. We could really understand why people would have sleep difficulties, and family caregivers in particular, when they're looking after somebody with dementia.
At what point does it really fall apart, and does it increase the risk for institutionalization? Because we want people to be able to live in the place of their choice for as long as possible, live at home with their loved ones. But does a poor sleep pattern and all of these sorts of things you talked about in terms of depression and anxiety and so on for the potential falling while you're wandering, does all of that lead potentially to institutionalization, or does it have to? Or
we all know that all it takes is a few days of not sleeping much, and our moods are affected. Our ability to make decisions is affected. And then all it takes is a little something to happen to kind of break the whole system that was kind of working, but not really working. So if you're not getting enough sleep yourself, you can't look after anybody, basically. So it's really important that the family caregiver gets sleep, because if that doesn't happen, and if the family caregiver is out of sorts, the whole system is going to collapse. And institutionalization, it happens generally when the system collapses.
Right. And I think the goal is to keep from getting there, right? So we want to do everything we can to help people sleep better and help caregivers sleep better. So we've sort of touched on a couple of these different sorts of strategies that people can use to enhance their sleep and that caregivers can use to help themselves and the people that they're caring for sleep better. And I think we want to move a little bit more on to what the evidence and research and innovation tells us about those best ways are. And Roseanne, I know Simon had a really good conversation with Baird about this.
We want to start this conversation about strategies and evidence by first introducing an innovator who recognized the challenge sleep poses for persons living with dementia and their caregivers. So Baird is the founder of the Sleep Kit, which is an innovation that aims to improve individuals' sleep quality. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in gerontology, and she's actually completing a Bachelor of Social Work. So that might be of interest to Adriana. She has 5 years of experience working and volunteering with older adults, including as an activity coordinator at York Care Centre in the Maritimes. And during her undergraduate degree, she began developing the Sleep Kit, which was tested as part of a research trial funded by CABHI and the New Brunswick Health Research Foundation in 2018. Simon had a chance to speak with her in a short interview, and so we want to share the highlights of that conversation now.
My name is Baird. I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick on the East Coast, and I created the Sleep Kit, which is a small box of alternative therapies. It's a holistic approach for older adults living with dementia to improve their sleep quality.
I remember when I first heard the Sleep Kit, it's like a great name, because I just imagined, wow, what would be inside of a sleep kit? Like giant pillow, some sort of magical unicorn dream animal. I didn't know what to expect. And when I first encountered you and the concept, it was at the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation where you applied. And we look at a lot of digital solutions there. And we always do our best to say, innovation doesn't have to be technical. Innovation can just be, coming at a problem in a new way. And then we say that, and then often we had trouble sort of pointing at things that were really great examples of that. And that's what I really liked about the Sleep Kit is like, right, this is creative and innovative, but it's not very high tech. So I thought maybe we could start by just sort of going through the kit a little bit to give people a sense of what's in there and how it relates to sleeping.
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate that you said that, because in the beginning stages, when I would tell people about the Sleep Kit, like innovators, they would often say, oh, well, maybe you could make an app for the Sleep Kit or do this. And I'm like, yeah, I love technology and that's awesome, but the Sleep Kit is like a really simple idea, and I wanted it to be simple. It's just kind of bringing it back to that idea of human connection, one-on-one interaction, and how important that is. Where with technology, although that can help with that, it also kind of sometimes takes us away from that a little bit. So
to give them a picture of what we're talking about, it's definitely not an app. So there's
no,
we're not taking out our cell phones here. I have in front of me one of the sleep kits that Eve sent me some time ago, and I'm basically opening a very nice looking box, just to give you a picture. And now we'll see what's inside the box and talk about what's in there.
Yeah, so there's 13 items in the kit. And again, the whole idea is kind of based on this idea of one-on-one social interaction before bed, having a bedtime routine. And when you're living with dementia, everyone has their routine. And so sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to do that. So it's kind of everything collected in one box. So you can just take out, it's easy, you can grab it. And experiment with these different items. So
first thing I'm pulling out of my box is a coloring book, I think.
Yes. Yeah, so the coloring book was designed by a local graphic designer here in Fredericton called Dylan Sweeney. And we had some discussions around it. I said I wanted the images to kind of represent the East Coast of Canada, so that can kind of incorporate that idea of reminiscence as well. Like as you're coloring, you're talking about the images, like, I think there's pictures of, like, there's a farm scene and there's scenes of the ocean. There's Hopewell Rocks as well. So yeah, just people can talk about what they're seeing and then maybe ask, like, have you ever been somewhere like this? What was it like? And that can kind of spark that conversation as well. And some people do say, with the kit, if someone's in the later stages of dementia, perhaps they might not be able to necessarily color anymore, but they could maybe help to choose the colors or, like I said, discuss the pictures, go through, maybe the care partner is coloring. And it's really just this idea of how can we do these activities together and for it to be reciprocal.
The templates are really beautiful. Dylan's a talented guy. I think.
Yes, he is. Yeah. And all the graphic design is Mitsuko Sato. She is a friend of mine. She's kind of family, I guess. She's my brother's partner's sister. And she helped with the very simplistic design. Like, I wanted it to be very simplistic, easy to read. It's black. The branding's kind of black and white with this lavender color that kind of brings in this idea of, sleep. And I guess I associate that with sleep. So there's a hairbrush and a hand mirror, right, which people always ask me, why is there a hand mirror in here? So a great question. So I actually read a study that showed that mirrors were a tool for communication with people living with dementia. So for someone maybe in the later stages, in the research study that I did at York Care Center in Fredericton, we had such great feedback about the mirror. People would smile, they would make faces in the mirror, they would laugh. It was definitely a hit. I remember one night going into where I worked in the nursing home and seeing a woman was sitting up in her chair and the care staff was brushing her hair and she was holding the mirror, looking at herself, getting her hair brushed. And she just had this big grin on her face. And it was really nice. One of my fond memories of that. But the other important thing to mention, though, is that mirrors are not always a positive experience for people living with dementia. Sometimes they don't recognize what they're seeing or who they're seeing in the mirror. And so it's just important to be mindful of that. And I do kind of always say that because, and I think too with a mirror, if there's a mirror on the wall and you're walking by it, that might be more frightening or abrupt than something you're holding in your hand and you, like a handheld mirror, you would have a bit more control with that. So yeah, that's where, and then the hairbrush is kind of self-explanatory. It's just comforting to have your hair brushed. And even if you don't have hair, if you're an older gentleman, it's just a nice feeling. So yeah, that's why the hairbrush was included.
Nice. Also, I've got a copy of Anne of Green Gables in my kit.
Yes. Yeah. That's the book I ended up choosing because I used to read that book to the residents in Birch Grove where I worked at York Care Center. In the evenings, I would read that book, and it's a great book because, well, it's familiar to to the East Coast. And it's funny and it can be serious, and it's really beautifully written. Like, I just love the language in the book, and people just really enjoyed it when I read that. So that's kind of why I picked that book. But again, people can kind of play around with the kit, and if they have a favorite book, they can certainly read that as well. These are just kind of suggestions and ideas.
And there's another item here that is obviously custom made, like another one of the things you created yourself, both because I can tell because it's stylishly designed by your sister-in-law or friend of sister. I've lost track. Anyway, I'm bad with the family relationship thing. But it's got little prompts in it, like, where did you go to school? Did you take any training after secondary school? And this is like a evocative little pad here. Like, how did you see people using this?
Yeah, so that's the reflection booklet. And I actually added that after the research study that we did. This was an item that came later because from the feedback from the study, a lot of people said, the kit's great. We would love to have something that kind of sparks conversation, especially if that relationship doesn't already exist. So, care partners could be family, it could be friends, neighbors, or in the long-term care setting, it could be care staff who, might know the person, or maybe it's their first shift. You never know. So working with these questions to kind of get to know one another.
I mean, the other good thing about calling it a kit is that, like with any good kit, there's like some self-assembly required. It's something that that the person receiving engages with. It's not like getting a new TV where you just plug it in and start watching. It's meant to be something that the end user is engaging with and helping to construct and bringing it together. And that's, you're taking part in this conversation as part of our episode about caregiving and sleep and where those two things overlap. And so we're talking a lot in this episode about the role of caregivers and the burdens that they face. And sleep has a kind of special relationship in that because it's so necessary to both partners. And if it starts to go downhill, it can go downhill for both of them. And the thing I found intriguing about some of the research behind what you did was that you were looking for the relationship between social engagement and having a good sleep. And so just as you were describing here, I think it's obvious, like all these things are tools to give care partners ideas about how to socially engage and have like a pleasant experience. Like there's also the idea of routine. But like, can you talk a little bit more about the value of social engagement with having a good sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. The reason I came up with this idea was in my undergrad at St. Thomas University in gerontology, I took an aging and health class with Dr. Janet Durkee-Lloyd, and she wanted us to create, look at an issue with aging and health, research it, and then come up with some kind of innovation. So I looked into dementia, and something that I found was that sleep was really overlooked. There's not a lot of research on it. The kind of existing remedies, I guess, are exercise, don't drink coffee, and obviously medication, which isn't always helpful. So I did find this study that looked at social interaction throughout the day and how that improved people's sleep, which makes complete sense, right? If you're having a day where you're engaged and doing stuff and busy and keep, stimulated, then you're going to probably sleep better at night. And so I just really like this idea of like, okay, well, why can't we take that and do it like right before bed? And then the idea of like this routine and like relaxing before bed, because when I worked in long-term care, one of the things I saw was, well, we know that nursing homes are understaffed and it can be difficult. And so nursing staff are really busy. And a lot of times, the person would go to bed and it's like, okay, I know one of the LPNs who, Lori Yerxa, she did a testimonial for us and said, a lot of times we just turn the light off, shut the door, say goodnight, because it's all we have time for. Mm. But this is more, okay, how can we prepare this person for bed, and like really this idea of person-centered care and how powerful social interaction can be, like, because again, a lot of times in long-term care, you might not be getting a lot of social stimulation.
It must be nice for the caregiver / partner as well, because people, it's mutual. Like the whole shifting from the language of caregiver to care partners already sort of suggests that it goes both ways, which it does in those relationships. Absolutely. And this is a nice intervention that is, if the person can work it into their life, it's kind of beneficial for both people doing it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. And that's kind of what I had in mind as well. Like, this is an opportunity for both people to relax at the end of a busy day. And for people who are care partners at home, it can be overwhelming and stressful and difficult. And so, you're going to have good days and bad days and everything in between. So at the end of the night, if you can kind of have this time together that's meaningful and not as like busy, and kind of taking that time away to really spend meaningful time together. So
I know you did a study to do some evaluation of how this went. So can you just sort of briefly give me a sense of what you learned from that in terms of how people responded to it and what kind of outcomes you had?
Yeah, so we had, I think we had 41 participants. So there were 16 in the community, people living at home, and the remainder were in the long-term care at York Care Center. And we had, basically I went out and in the community met with people, went through the kit with them, and they wore a Fitbit to track their sleep. And they also wrote in the sleep diary, which is another item in the kit that has every item in the beginning, a little explanation of how it can be used, just some ideas, and then you can log the date, the time the person went to bed, what time they woke up, what items they used. Like there's a checklist, so you can record that. And then at the bottom, there's some space to kind of write more notes. And I think that was really important because you can kind of have the ability to look back and say, okay, so these 3 nights were great because we used this item, or this item didn't work at all. You know what I mean? Or so it's good to kind of keep a log of that. The people living in long-term care, their sleep, so the number of restless bouts throughout the night decreased, which was great. But I think the really great data came from the diaries. The 2 main themes that came out of it would have been routine and focus. So there was a mother and daughter who did the sleep kit together, and she said, it was kind of nice for me to switch up my routine from coming in every day to coming in the evening time, and she could get more stuff done during the day and then come and visit with her mom at night and have a really nice, she would kind of be there when she went to bed and go home. So I think that was really nice as well. There was a lot of data that came out of it. I could probably talk forever about it. You can definitely go on my website and read all about it as well. It's all there, and some really good outcomes. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. And I just thought I'd end on asking, the kit is still out there, right? People can still get it?
Yeah, so the kit is available on my website right now, thesleepkit.org, and it's free shipping in Canada. And yeah, we sold quite a few. I actually had the Fredericton Public Library here reach out recently, and they have a lending library, which is really cool. So they don't just have books, you can borrow other things. I think they have snowshoes and other items that you can borrow. So they were like, it would be so awesome to have the sleep kit. So they got a few, and we're going to pilot it here and see how it goes, because people haven't having the opportunity to take the kit home and try it, and then see if it works, see if they like it, and then it's kind of nice to have that opportunity. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh, I love that idea about the library. That's great. When the library is on your side, you're doing good work.
I love the library. They're amazing.
Favorite part of the municipal government. Anyway, thanks so much, Eve. That was great. Thanks for letting us know all about this project and for participating in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking me and for your continued support. It's awesome. I really appreciate it.
And following on really the discussion that we've had before, we heard from Eve about the incredible work that she's doing. I'm wondering, as a caregiver, what's been your experience managing sleep for your husband? are the kinds of strategies that Eve talked about, these kinds of things, coming together at night and having routines and doing things that are comforting. Have those sorts of things worked for you, or are there other sorts of strategies that have been helpful for you?
I find that combing his hair really helps, and grooming him really helps to just basically relax him.
In terms of sleeping, so for some people, it's, if you can, having a routine. We watch Jeopardy at 7. I don't know what time it's on. Like, we had somebody, her husband loved watching Jeopardy. So they watched Jeopardy, and then it was pajamas time. Like, they had a real structure to their evening. And evenings were particularly hard because the day is done and you've had dinner, and now the nights are so long, especially with our winters, right? And now COVID and everything else. So it's finding rituals or things that work. And that only you know what works for you and your husband. And then finding rituals that work just for you, not necessarily for your husband, because you may hate Wheel of Jeopardy or whatever that may be, that show. But even saying, okay, he likes to sleep more now. I need time to myself. Let's find a way that he can be in bed at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock. I'm up till 10. And between 7 and 10, this is me time. Because I know he likes to sleep now. And the days are busy. So it's carving in times for yourself within the busyness of life, or not so busy with COVID, depending on the person. And, that's easier said than done, because you could say to me, no, Adriana, you don't get it. Like, he's just, there's no predictability or no pattern to some of these things. But even if every day is trying a new thing, if you can, even if today he fell asleep in front of the TV, could you use that time to do something, like do yoga? I was talking to a client recently with these online exercise programs and yoga. And there's just so many things now since COVID that you could turn on at any time that you want when you have time, right? And so if you like doing yoga, meditation, mindful, whatever it is having already that program, know which, I don't know, there's so many of them out there, which program it is that you like, that you can just zero in, turn it on, do your 20 minutes, half hour of yoga, whatever, that Tai Chi, whatever you enjoy, and then move on. But again, it's pre-plan all these things. So when the moments come up, you're ready.
And I think the importance of ritual and scheduling is something that brings benefits in sort of a number of key ways. And it's something that I often recommend to my patients and their caregivers. I think one important benefit of it is when you're taking care of somebody with dementia, you're making like a million decisions every day. You're always reacting to a new circumstance, a new change. And it's very easy to get almost like worn out by all the decision making you have to make. So having the ritual there just takes one more decision off of your plate to have to make. So you just know what to do next. I mean, that to some degree is even the genius of the sleep kit. Which is that it's a series of structured activities. So you're not just thinking, now what do I do? Now what do I do? You're just like, we just start doing this set of activities. So it deals with that sort of decision fatigue that we face when we're taking care of somebody for whom there's a lot of unpredictability in our lives. So I think that's the first important aspect of it. The second important aspect of it, I think, is that as with folks without dementia, anxiety and fear is a real driver of insomnia in folks with dementia. Now, in folks who are cognitively typical or cognitively intact, we'll often treat it with psychotherapy. So you go talk to somebody, see a therapist, you can talk about them. That's the far and away actually the most effective way of dealing with anxiety-related insomnia, which is one of the most common causes of insomnia in the population at large. It's difficult for somebody with cognitive impairment to engage in cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, they just no longer have the cognitive capacities to do that. But what ritual does is it deals with those anxieties. It provides a sense of security that somebody will then know what happens next, and they know what happens next. It takes away the fear of unpredictability from their lives and deals with insomnia in a way that doesn't necessarily require a high degree of residual cognitive capacity. And then the third important thing about ritual from a sleep perspective is it plays an important role in strengthening the biological clock. So we know that circadian rhythms, the internal biological clock, is an important driver of when we're able to fall asleep and stay asleep and when we're awake during the day. And the more that we can strengthen the biological clock, the more people will be able to fall asleep at the times that are appropriate for them, and to be awake at the times that are appropriate for them. So this includes things that regularize the biological clock are having a regular schedule, a regular sleep-wake schedule, a regular meal schedule, a regular physical activity schedule. So the more regular things are for folks with cognitive impairment and dementia, the stronger their biological rhythms are, and the better they'll be able to sleep. So I think these rituals, even beyond the sort of dyad-enhancing effects that Adriana was talking about, have many benefits from a sleep perspective for people who are living with dementia.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, above and beyond all of that, I mean, Corrine mentioned before she's got a GPS tracker, which is a form of a sensor, so she can sort of keep track of her husband's behaviors and so on. And I'm wondering, Adriana, from the perspective of Baycrest Home, the work that you're doing there, are there other kinds of devices that can be put in the home to monitor what people are doing, to help you figure out what the rituals might be, or to know the patterns so that you can better determine what these lifestyle changes might be or the rituals you need to develop are?
Yes. So, I mean, I call them gadgets. That's my fancy term for them. But, all these.
It's the technical term.
Exactly. Yeah. And again, it depends on your situation, because you live with your husband. For somebody like you, perhaps having a bell or a sound on the front door in case you fall asleep, if you were to open the front door, it would wake you up, would make most sense, right? So for somebody who doesn't live with a person with dementia, for like, say, an adult daughter that doesn't live in the same home, there's different gadgets to say if the person's going from the bed to the bathroom, if the person has fallen, if the person's going to the fridge, how much they're moving throughout the night, and they get information through their phone around what's happening for the person with dementia. So it's prescribed differently for different situations, and that's the beauty of it, that we can customize these solutions based on what the problems are, say, for you. So for you, it would be, you would want to be woken up at night if the front door were to be open. You would want a loud noise, because then you would wake up. But you may not.
And we've even had sensors, for example, that when the door opens, it has a recording of the loved one's voice, of the caregiver's voice, saying, it's nighttime, go back to bed, just to remind the person, because it's better if it comes from the person's voice, right? So those kind of things can happen.
And there's also interventions, like a lot of people respond really well when they see a stop sign. So painting or having a stop sign by the front door, sometimes people realize, oh, stop, don't go. I mean, it's it doesn't make sense to us, but it's intuitive that when we see stop, we stop. So there's those kinds of strategies. There's also, we've had with some people, actually, like you said, voice recording, but in the room. So again, it's finding what the issue is for that particular person. And one size does not fit all, as we all know. And so different people, the issues are very different. But we have solutions at Baycrest at Home to address these disturbances. And what we do well is that we customize it. We first assess what the situation is. We don't just sell people and say, oh, you need this, this, and this, and this. We do a thorough assessment with a social worker, an occupational therapist that understands about safety also in the home, and put those together with the technologies that we have available to come up with a plan, something that makes sense to you. Because we can come up with a brilliant plan, but if you said, there's no way I want these sensors or videos in my home, then it wouldn't work. It's just coming up with something that makes sense for everybody.
You're personalizing it. You're personalizing the approach.
That's right. And this is what we're good at. One of the things.
One of many things you're good at. One
of many things that Baycrest at Home is good at. But the other thing is, Corrine, when I was listening to you around now the day programs closed down, and so you're together 24/7. one of the programs we're creating, we call it, and it's not a good name for it, but a virtual day program. It's social engagement activities live online, so that they're geared to the person with dementia. So the activities would be the same as the ones that your husband would have had in the day program where he attended, but there are virtual online. And so there's, say, 8 participants in a group having a discussion or an exercise, or bingo or whatever. There's a whole myriad of activities. And yes, it's on TV, on a screen, but it's engaging as opposed to a passive thing like watching a movie. Somebody, and I don't know his name, but say it's Bob, I'm looking at you, put your hand up, or we're doing this story or whatever. So it's engaging people. And so we're trying that. And we're very excited that this would be something not just for during the COVID time, but moving forward. Even people that attend day programs, a lot of people can't attend 7 days a week. So wouldn't it be great if somebody could attend a day program physically 2 days a week, and the other days there would be activities in the home? So it's very, very exciting work that we're doing.
Andrew, I guess my question to you is, Adriana says no one size fits all. And you guys have both talked about some incredible behavioral or lifestyle interventions. But what happens if those don't work for a caregiver or a person living with dementia? Are there medical options they should consider? Who should they go to? What are the right questions to ask? Where do they begin?
So I think the first thing is definitely to try these simple behavioral interventions, getting routine, getting more physical activity and light during the day, getting a regular sleep routine at night, and then regular sleep times across the days. I mean, these are things that everybody should try. But if you find that that's not working, I think it's important not to simply accept that sleep disturbances are a part of growing older or a part of developing neurodegenerative disorder, that there are things that can be done about them, and to speak to your caregiver, your physician, your healthcare provider about that. There are many, many things that can cause sleep disturbances. Sometimes it can be a specific symptom, like urinary symptoms or pain that might be treatable. Sometimes it might be a symptom of a sleep disorder, like sleep apnea or restless legs or something like that. That may not necessarily require medication to treat, but does need to be diagnosed. Remember that in older folks in general, disorders like sleep apnea are very common. About 30% of women and up to 50% of older men between the ages of 60 and 85 have sleep apnea, which is the most common sleep disorder. And in fact, we're starting to appreciate that this is even higher in individuals with dementia. And this might be in part because of sleep apnea might predispose to the dementia. And we're starting to wonder actually whether dementia might predispose to sleep apnea. And these are treatable things that need to be diagnosed. So I would definitely bring it up and not accept as an answer the idea that this is just an inevitable consequence of aging or dementia. I mean, one of the challenges that we have is there still aren't that many medical professionals who really have a lot of expertise in dealing with this. And we're also limited in our ability to diagnose these things outside of the sleep lab. And it's very hard to bring somebody with Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal dementia and say, hey, look, I'm going to go to my sleep clinic in the shopping mall down the street, and they're going to just make them sit in a sleep lab. I mean, that's not going to work all that well for a lot of folks. In the same way that, Corrine, your husband may not have tolerated going to a CT scan or an MRI. He may not easily tolerate going to a sleep lab. So we've actually taken a lot of interest and support from CABHI in trying out new sensors to be able to make diagnoses of things like sleep apnea, like restless legs, like fragmented, interrupted sleep in the home with wearable devices that people will be able to easily tolerate, that aren't uncomfortable, that don't disturb sleep. So I think, because I do think that identifying what the specific problem is the first step in sorting out people's sleep. Obviously, the treatment for somebody whose sleep is disturbed because they pee 5 times a night is very different from the treatment of somebody who sleeps poorly because of sleep apnea or restless legs or Alzheimer's a disease. And in many cases, it's all of these things. It's the individual with frontotemporal dementia who also has an enlarged prostate, who also has back pain, who's also very anxious, and who may also have sleep apnea. And if you treat any single one of these things, if you treat the pain but not the urination, well, they're still going to get up 5 times a night. So you really have to take a holistic view, all the way from getting the right sleep rituals and the right family and a comforting family environment, all the way up to potentially treating serious medical conditions.
So I guess maybe I can, put my audience hat on when they're going to maybe ask, where's the role of sleeping pills in all of this? Because I think a lot of people have that kind of in the back of their head. And so I guess since I have you here, I'll just ask the question, is there a role for sleeping pills? Where does that kind of play into?
Right. So I think there's an extremely limited role for sleeping pills. I think there are far more prescriptions for sleeping pills being made that are actually needed or beneficial. It isn't to say that it isn't sometimes a useful thing to do, but I think we know this. I mean, we know this both in folks without dementia and folks with dementia, that the sleeping pills in general are not particularly effective, have many side effects that are even worse for people who suffer from dementia. So a lot of these sleeping pills have falls, impaired balance, cognitive impairment as side effects. I think for the most part, I mean, when we are treating insomnia in older individuals in general, we've got to think very carefully before you reach for one of these pills and decide that the marginal benefits are worth the potential side effects. That isn't to say that pharmacotherapy isn't used. I'm speaking about sleeping pills like the Imavanes and the Ambiens and the stuff you see on American TV, right? All the times, and the lunescence. I mean, this stuff's not particularly useful. Clearly, if somebody has an anxiety disorder, whether it's related to or not related to their neurodegenerative condition, medications can be helpful. So sometimes I will treat anxiety and other behavioral symptoms of dementia with things like SSRIs, right? And I think I'm not saying that these things are never useful, but I think we got to think carefully about what we're treating. And I think the idea that your loved one can't sleep, therefore let's pop them on some Imavane as the first thing we do is a flawed idea. I mean, the first thing we got to do is figure out what the problem is, treat the specific problem, and then maybe at the very end of the line, if there's nothing else going on that's working, maybe we can consider one of these medications. But I really think that these should be used sparingly, if at all, especially in the older population.
So Adriana, in your clinical practice, what have you seen?
So I'm going to speak as a social worker, as an advocate of families, because it's been my experience that a lot of physicians feel like you do, and rightly so. I mean, I get it 100%. But what is so hard for families is that, it's easy for us and in our office to tell people, do this, try their routines, try that. In real life, it's very hard. People are exhausted, people are losing it, people are stressed, and people are not sleeping. And so if you could I've seen so many families say, if you just give him something, just like even it's for me to sleep, give him something to conk him out, because I need to get caught up with my sleep so I can then perhaps even intervene or do some behavioral strategy. So whatever great suggestions you're telling me, that right now I can't even hear you. I'm so exhausted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is why you need to hook up with a clinician who's not going to give up, right? I mean, you don't want to see the guy who's going to say, try warm bath at night, and then, off we go, and that's it. Yeah. Because I really think it's a process. It's a process, and pills might be a part of that process. And choosing the right pill might be a part of the one that's going to get some benefit with the least impact on cognitive impairment. That's not going to lead to your loved one, heaven forbid, getting up in the middle of the night, getting off balance and breaking a hip, right? So it's absolutely. I'm not dogmatically against the idea of ever using medications ever. But I think we need to be thoughtful about the things we do, and oftentimes we're not. Oftentimes people are reaching for medications as an easy fix rather than a thoughtful answer, and I think that's something we need to be careful about.
So is the take-home message from my perspective the idea that we need to really talk and learn about the needs of the caregiver and their person, talk to care providers, talk to their family physicians so that we can find the right solutions?
That's right, man. I think we really need to take a multidimensional view of each individual patient's sleep problem, right? And really understand, what are the environmental contributors, what are the social contributors to this. Address them if we can, right? And also make a proper medical diagnosis as well. If somebody has an anxiety disorder, let's make a diagnosis of that, or depression or mood disorder. These are all common problems in people who are suffering from dementias, and address these issues, address the physical symptoms of pain and urination and itchiness and difficulty breathing, identify sleep apnea and restless legs, and deal with all of these things. I got to say, from my perspective and my experience, if you take a really holistic approach, I find it rare that you find the problem that still requires just straight out sedation as the solution. That if you really take the time to take a holistic approach to things.
Yeah. So, Andrea, I want to expand your idea of holistic to include the family or the partner.
Absolutely.
Right? Because even when you said, I'll take the individual circumstances into account, by that, in an ideal world, it's also the partner's circumstances, absolutely, right? And so expanding this idea of the patient is the person that comes to you, the person with dementia that you're treating, to how do we treat the dyad here? Because if one person's up, they keep the other person up. So just kind of that more fulsome perspective.
Yeah, and I think just speaking of the dyads, let's give the last word to Corrine then, because as part of that dyad, I'd like to know what your views are, any last words you have on this conversation, your perspective.
It's been very eye-opening, what Adriana and Andrew have said. I think it's just such a learning process for me. Even after 3 years, I'm still learning, because the changes in this disease, and I think all other dementias too, is progressive. So I it's just nice to hear all the information and the advice. One thing that I find that is really lacking is the consultations. Like, we only see the caregiver, the health care provider once every 6 months, and that to me is just not enough. 3 months would be great, and with the pandemic as well, it makes it even harder. So that
maybe actually that with all the virtual care coming online because of COVID, that may actually open up more opportunities for more intervention along the way instead of these longer delayed times. So that's maybe one other bit of lemonade from the lemons.
I'm really hoping that would be the case. I'm really hoping because I think, I don't know whether it's because it's a lack of funding, or it's the specialists are so bogged down and have such a long wait list that they can only see the patients every 6 months. But 6 months is a long time. To me, my husband is very ill, and there's nothing for him. So I know it's progressive, but you always hope.
It's interesting, because when you say that, Corrine, the other piece is, even if you don't see the physician, I know at Baycrest, so you were saying that he's being followed now at Baycrest, there is a nurse, there's a social worker, right? So sometimes what a lot of families do is, when you have questions, concerns, or you just want to chat with somebody, you don't have to wait for your 6 months or whatever till you see the physician. There's no reason why you can't speak to the nurse weekly, or the social worker for that matter, right? And so it's also for families to understand that when there's a team, and people forget, like for you, your husband is, every 6 months makes you feel like he doesn't have anything so important, or else he would be seen weekly. But the fact is that that's not how our system works. When in fact, sometimes when you see the professional, even though they don't make your husband better, you feel better because you feel that your questions have been answered.
Yeah.
And so in dementia care, sometimes is even speaking to the team, to the nurse, to the social worker in that team and saying, I was in this podcast and I realized maybe I need to speak to somebody more regularly because it makes me feel like as issues come up, I have somebody to ask these things. The nurse and the social worker, if they hear something from you that's concerning, they'll go to the physician right away and say, so-and-so is having this. Maybe you need to see him sooner, right? But it's important for families to understand that families have rights and families can, if you don't ask, you don't get. And our system's really overloaded, but it doesn't mean that you can't speak to other professionals within the team first. And even if it's that you don't have specific questions, it's to say, I just find it reassuring to speak to somebody. Is this normal? Where should I go? Whatever questions that you have. And having worked in the memory clinic for most of my career, realizes that we're not good to reaching out to families. But for families that reach out to us, we're really receptive. It's not a fair system necessarily, but it's important for families to know that they have a right to reach out to the teams that are caring for their family members and for them and for family caregivers.
And when the families do reach out, often those teams can provide not just conversation, but resources.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we like to end with also is to make sure that each of our guests has a chance to highlight some resources that they think would be useful for all of the listeners. So I'd like to turn to each of you and ask what sort of resources would you like to share? It could be a website, it could be a book, it could be a thought, it could be whatever you like. Adriana, on the topic of resources, is there something you've got in mind in particular?
Oh, I could do a podcast on resources for families.
Yes. and we will put some links in the text for the podcast. People can get to those. Yeah.
There's Baycrest Home. That's www. Baycrest it's AT home. And there is the Alzheimer's Society, and there is the memory clinic. There's most memory clinics have other professionals associated to them other than the physician. There's for FTD, there's the Association of Frontotemporal Dementias. That is really good and have webinars and educational seminars. You talked about education being a really important factor around learning. Before you said you don't know, nobody's trained you to do the job you're doing. So there are a lot of online modules.
And Andrew, others that you have in mind?
So I'm not half as resourceful as Adriana is, but I'll give you one, which is the Canadian Sleep and Circadian Network, which is a network of researchers and clinicians that work in sleep. Has an outreach program and a website called Sleep On It, and the website is Sleep On It Canada. SLEEPONITCANADA.ca. And there's a section there on sleep in general, sleep disorders, but also sleep in aging as well, that I think is very relevant to our conversation.
And Corrine, do you have any favorite resources that have been helpful for you?
I've tried a whole bunch, to be honest. When my husband was okay, I think the adult day programs were amazing. I'm happy to hear they've gone virtual. He might join one of them. The Baycrest one, and we're hoping to get a spot. But I think those resources, and I think once the pandemic is over, we're going to try and get more people to come. And the teams as well. Thank you, Adriana, for reminding me, because you forget, with the pandemic, you're so isolated. Totally forget that there is a team behind. But our team has been firemen or firewomen, and also EMS, because my husband is finding it hard to get up now. Every time he either slips off the bed, which I've tried to prevent, or he somehow slips onto the floor, he can't get up. So we've had no visitors, but EMS folk, and they are part of our team. Yeah, as well as the social workers. I've forgotten. Yes. I really should call, because the Baycrest social workers are so amazing. So I should call and talk to her again. I haven't for a long time. So
I've got 2 quick resources to tell people about also, because Corrine was mentioning and Adriana was also mentioning the need for people to get resources. And especially if you're dealing with a new diagnosis of dementia in your family, what do you do? Where do you go for information? And CABHI has funded a program called iGeriCare, which is igericare.ca, which comes out of Hamilton Health Sciences and McMaster University. It's a great series of lessons that are really crafted to help people navigate through that journey. And it's intended for informal family caregivers, just to educate them a little bit more about what is dementia, how to promote brain health, different types of dementia, things around safety, anxiety, caring for people at home, and so on and so forth. And then the other is something, because as I mentioned before, I am a horrible sleeper. I'm doomed. I'm hoping that the fact that I've taken up drumming in my later life is going to counteract the fact that I don't actually sleep. We can do a whole other thing on music and exercise but
maybe not good for your neighbor's sleep.
I know, that's the problem. I got to get an electronic drum kit so that I don't keep them awake. But what I have found helpful, because I also have one of these minds that is just off thinking about 10,000 different things. So the discussion around mindfulness that came up before is, I think, something that I've relied on. And I often will make use of the Interaxon Muse system, and just to sort of get into that mindful state. And that's choosemuse.com, CHOOSEMUSE.com. And that's another CABHI company that we've been working with for a while. And I think, Andrew, you've had some experience with them as well.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a great device. And with that, we want to close this episode on caregiving, dementia, sleep during the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to thank all of you who are listening for joining us for this special conversation in collaboration with Baycrest Home. And we also want to thank, obviously, our guests, Eve Baird, Dr. Andrew Lim, Dr. Corrine Ong, and Dr. Adriana Shnall, as well as our podcast production team, including Simon Cheeseman, Ariel Townsend, and Soren Chular.
So to learn more about CABHI, please visit us at www.cabhi.com. For more information about Baycrest at Home, please visit Baycrest, BAYCREST, at home, ATHOME.ca. We'd also love your support for our podcast, so please be sure to follow us and leave a review on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And as we continue to navigate our second lockdown, we hope that all of our listeners stay safe and well.